Shaumitro, welcome to our little studio here that Amber and I are tutoring with Ketaki. Ketaki is our TA. The studio is on adaptive reuse, and we've been working on, as I mentioned, three separate types of sites. One a heritage site, one a modern heritage site, and one an industrial site. And the aim here is to look at different aspects of adaptive reuse through the lens of these three different types of sites and the potentials and possibilities that they provide. And I know that you've done so much work in adaptive reuse and the sensitive approach to it and the detail-oriented approach to it. So I really wanted for you to speak to our students and share your work with them. Very briefly, to those who don't know Shaumitro, I don't think there's anybody here who doesn't know who Shaumitro is. Shaumitro, graduate of this very institute from CEPT, has been working at Matthew and Ghosh, founded Matthew and Ghosh Architects with Nisha Matthew several years ago in Bangalore, has done projects of various scales, has also been a part of academics teaching at various institutes and being part of several juries as well. Shaumitro, I won't take up more time. This is about you. Thanks for being here, and we will take questions after your presentation.
Thank you, Khusru. I think we, and Amber and Ketaki, the three of the mentors. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you all. So I'm going to share some of my work and perhaps some thoughts. So it's to be seen in, I mean, I myself see the perspective of a larger practice, which is doing different kinds of things at different times or almost simultaneously. So I do see a bit of crossovers, which projects tend to inform one another in terms of various different aspects. So I think we'll come to that. So I'll give a quick overview of a few projects which I was fortunate to have got. So I've kept a few projects, and I'm actually myself surprised that how many of the projects have fallen into this kind of category. In terms of, I see that there is generally an overriding theme which sort of captures any project for that matter. As we talk about a lot of old buildings and older stock in cities, and we know that cities tend to recycle themselves, whether it's a strategy, such as in parts of Singapore, where there is a time frame and there is a recycling time and a reinvention time. So I think the bigger question which emerges is what is authentic, or what is a marker of time? Because as in the general worldwide perception of current histories and the general tendency of a lot of nations, as they for their political positions, they seem to be moving to the far past as the most authentic. And as I think we all know that nothing is really authentic, everything has a time and a place and people. So how does one define in that case that if things are across time, such as even the legacy of the modern architecture across the world as well as in India, where do we stand? How do we recognize what is of value? I say, so that's a very open-ended question, and there have been, of course, a lot of charters which have drawn up parameters by which one can do that. So actually we are fluctuating in a kind of time and space uh, which is rather fluid. I will begin with one project which was a complete reversal of what was actually the jail from the late 1800s in Bangalore, in this of what has now become the center of the city. It was earlier the sort of periphery, and the jail was moved to another place. And then, of course, it became a haven for a lot of movies were shot in the old barracks and things. And so this was a competition. Um, so the position that and a lot of these structures were actually falling apart. It was a complete reversal in the sense what was actually a domain for containment was now being opened as an urban space. So what does that do? It creates a new kind of condition, which where one is actually reversing this whole idea of enclosure and opening it to the public as an urban space. Yet, how to find the balance of um, keeping the remnants as well as recognizing them, so that one is actually building another layer of change onto an existing past. And of course this jail was built during the British times, so that's another layer. So the whole idea of confinement and prison, and which comes because still now I have not been able to find how the prisons were in ancient times, and what was the idea of punishment and isolation from society. How were people dealt with? So this is a new condition, which and the architecture, of course, was informed by prisons from across the world, which the Britishers had built before this. So the pattern on the left is it's a panopticon plan. And how does one overlay a new layer of open space? And also this, I would possibly do the project a bit differently at if I were to do it again and start, but this is a different time. So it's also the very, it's a time when Bangalore is really seen as the, um, it's seen as the new place which is going to give competition to San Francisco. And so there is a lot of aspiration which was actually there at that moment. So it actually becomes a set of sort of simple iconic forms which sit in the landscape. So the layers are about the open space, they're about the modification of the landscape, and how to overlay the patterns of movement of the past and erasing them with new ones. Also certain buildings which did remain here. The roof had actually fallen off, and these were the beds of concrete where the inmates used to sleep. So how to keep it as I mean, this is not the most pleasurable space to be in, and to keep that sense and feeling within, and yet make a large open space just around the tower, which was for surveillance, and that actually opens up. So the tower becomes a marker, but it becomes sort of no longer capable of surveillance of the people. The idea of techniques, I think we can perhaps take it up in the question time. This shows how the tower had been sort of added on and modified over the last few decades, and how one actually dealt with the idea of clearing that up, getting back to its original intent and being. And the third line of vertical line of diagram, which shows the overlay of a new architecture, which is very light, overlaid onto an existing architecture which is below, and how this landscape sort of comes together. Um, so the primary focus in such a project is actually the people, and how to make a place that is um, for people, and how to find the tools of how one looks at the possibility of how one should approach the change. So this has been a fairly active place, and a lot for dissent. It has been occupied, the whole central space has been occupied for various rallies as well as outside the space, also by design schools who sometimes hold their annual exhibitions over here. I will move to a project which is very dear to Nisha and to me, uh, which was a competition. It is unbuilt because we did come second. I don't think it is built yet or even started. Um, a very sad happening in the history of India, the Bhopal gas tragedy, and it's been decades, and the pain remains. Um, so this was the first time actually of course, we started from a very pragmatic position, which was about how to deal with a brownfield. Now, when we are talking about a brownfield, which is actually because of the decades of passage of time, the earth has sort of absorbed the contaminants, and um, it has actually reached the water table. So the technical process of clearing up a brownfield to its best is actually to excavate almost a reverse of a mountain of everything that is contaminated. So one is actually talking about changes the ground. So that we metaphorically and sort of in some ways literally took it, and that the way you excavate and the way you scour out the earth and make a landfill which is sealed so that the contaminants don't go to the scars of excavation. But the whole project, while it was a memorial, and we are familiar with the idea of the memorial, which generally is of a giant object taking center stage, this in fact relies on something else, which is Hardy's thought that ritual makes place. And so the buildings become non-existent, but of course there is inherited buildings, industrial buildings. So what we did was primarily about the ritual uh, of coming to a place and to create a sense of healing. So because it has caused so much pain, and lives have been destroyed and lost, that we felt that instead of overwhelming, having an overwhelming presence, it's better to actually disappear, um, accept the pain, recognize the pain, and highlight the healing as a ritual. So this, of course, was the model which we created. So it had a complete landscape process of clearing up the land, putting it back, how the landscape would sit, and how the new water would replenish and be clear and clean up till the water table. And one would meander through these spaces. Um, so it's very interesting as we are speaking about this, because there was a recent interview that we had done, and this obsession with the underground actually started, I think, in semester 5. So I have tracked back all my projects which have been underground. So here it was in the beginning of our career, this project where the right side image actually shows how how almost like a Magritte painting, how the landscape is sort of isolated and propped up as it recovers. And the idea of the ritual is just that you come and light a candle and there is nothing else. So that memorials are created by memory and shared memories and shared healing. And when we share the idea of putting a candle, like I have seen this in especially in Kerala, I have seen in certain temples, which must have actually been possibly a temple practice, a practice in temples where you put a diya, and here in the churches they have a place where you can light the candle. In the current cities, I also see that um, there are these generic kind of structures and characters, which is the like warehouses, and this is one of them, which I actually modified as a design studio space. Um, so it was an ordinary building, ground plus one, with reasonably good heights. So it actually became a building which one was dealing with as almost like a surgeon, um, and yet of course beyond that one was also adding things to it, but one was aware of its bones. So the bones were kept, but the yellow portions were removed, and a new skeleton, additional skeleton was inserted to make three floors out of two floors and an additional floor, and yet find a way to bring light in the center of the building, and neutralize all its specificities to an absolute to a space which would uh, dissolve itself to the presence of light, because color for them, for fabric designers, is so essential. And as my friend and client tells me that it is only 2 hours, an hour or little plus in the morning and a little time in the evening, when actually colors can be perceived in their in absolute perfectness, if one is looking at it in natural light. Of course, the understanding of how does so a lot of these beginnings actually happen with sketches. I'm still a rather analog and sort of digitally illiterate person. Cannot really draw very well, or rather can't draw on most softwares. But I do enjoy this process, because a lot um, I do find a strong connection between what has been absorbed by the mind and what get translated and processed and appears when one draws. So this is the building, how the one on the left was an exact twin of the one, or identical twin of the one on the right. So as you can see, there is a new skin, there is a new addition, there is a bridge which connects. Uh, so why the skin actually came into place is for a very particular reason of light. So this is the connection which exists now, which did not exist earlier. The bridge, and how the two floors actually now become three levels, and the top floor gets added, and how we talk about sustainability and energy consciousness. And so this is, of course, I mean, most of our buildings actually we try to, and of course I can understand that there are far harsher climates than Bangalore. Bangalore is rather lucky and fortunate to have temperatures which don't swing, let's say, less than 10 degrees and higher than, let's say, at best 39, 40. um, um, and the light, in fact, is very, very almost similar to Mediterranean light, clear skies. um, Here we did complete natural ventilation and things like that. But here, as you can see the two skeletons come together. You see the concrete skeleton, and the beams and the columns remain, and the steel secondary skeleton attaches to that. So it's a very interesting process. So it's like a microsurgery that one is trying to do. When we do adaptive reuse, it's about um, if we do adaptive reuse, is it the end of the process, or is it something that is going to enable another time? So the center of the building has been carved out with glass. Um, the light comes from the top and goes right to the heart of the building in the center. These are some very recent pictures which my friend has taken. I mean, if one looks at the picture on the right, is it very different from the early modern movement, industrial or even hospital spaces of Eastern Europe? I would say no, they're absolutely similar. Um, so now with this new skin, and those are the weaving machines for sampling, and the skin is made with bison board, which is on a folded steel sheet. So that becomes a very, very light skin, which is insulated. Um, the central space, which opens up and connects the terrace. And so the space on the left is actually the what they call as the war room, where buyers come, and where the best kept secrets and the new developments of the business are unfolded to them. So it has a very, very clear structural thing. It's here as I've this picture on the left is just painted steel which has worn out, and this is something which the question of age and aging, and I wouldn't call it as wearing out. I would say that it is lived in, and I think that creates an ambience um, of comfort and belonging, and creates an extreme ease of settling into a place. Now, these are, in some ways, they are psychological um, things that um, we unknowingly just find, or in such spaces we find ourselves comfortable in. Um, so this is actually in the second building now, where friends of mine, they had shot their wonderful furniture. Um, so that how these spaces actually become are open, and actually the space has been kept like this. And my friend who owns this place, he loves it. He says that I can it just lets everyone do whatever they feel like in this, and I don't need the space. So there are no doors, there's nothing, it's just like a within the compound is just open. um, a small project we did close to a 200-year-old church in central Bangalore, which was next to the St. Mark's Church. So there was a parish hall, which is the box you see in the yellow. So there was a very vivid memory of the place for the parishioners, and they did want a hall where weddings could take place, and not really for prayers, but more as a place for more social gathering, which could be and they were so attached, but they didn't know what to do with it. So we actually created a structure which would sort of straddle independently over this. And in as a consequence of that, what we did was we lifted it by an extra floor, so that actually one got the roof of the old building as well as an extra space. And the arrow that you see is how the intersection of so it has also the pastor's office and various things. So this red box, which is not literally red, but it is basically a diagonal kind of insert which connects the view to the church. So you can literally see what is yellow is actually the old building. The gap in between is the roof of the previous building, and the building sort of hovers above itself, has its own language. Um, and it becomes rather clear on in the figure on the left how this works. So it creates very interesting intersections of light and space, which sort of have sort of grown over as well as attached uh, uh, to it. This was a project I did with Gertz Hagmuller. This was the 17th, it was the house of the Dutch Viceroy in Fort Cochin, near the parade ground. And at that, I think this must have been my um, sort of first, the earliest building that I was looking at. So my client friend, he did know Gertz, and so Gertz and I worked on it together on the design, and then we took over from there because he's based in Kathmandu, and was also sort of easing on his practice due to age, and uh, we continued with that. Um, Again, a heritage structure. So the interventions actually happen in the landscape. Largely no changes made to the exterior except that the building was really falling apart and it was in bad shape. I will have to still dig out my pictures to actually find the old condition. So this is more in the setback, and which created just 3 rooms, premium rooms on the top, for which is now run as a hotel, and the next block has been done by Bijoy Jain. That's right next door. Earlier there was a compound wall in between. Now it's been removed. So now there's a lovely cafe in that open space that you saw. The pool is now gone actually. Um, so in the central space, it was about the in all the beams and everything was. So this was actually replaced with a steel beam because it was completely rotten, and then we've got the opportunity to also create a certain space. Air was of course moving through the building on the top. So each room had there were terraces, so we used the verandas and we created like courtyards where one could bathe and just have an open space right next to the room. So one um, thing in such a place is how to uh, you know what kind of language does one look at, and how does one deal with a building which is of a certain heritage? Of course, it was quite a bit mutilated. It was the general managers of the tea garden who were staying here, and because of their family needs, they had made reasonable amount of changes. So we had to sort of recover as much as we could of the original and made some additions, like what you see is a mezzanine where you could just be by yourself upstairs reading. So this is a 120-year-old, almost 125-year-old orphanage, which was started by the trust after the Mysore famine. And my client leased the property for a design store. Um, and it was interesting to see the history of the family. They were business people, the Chettiars, and this was the condition of the building at the time when we found it. It was after the children grew up um, uh, in the early 1900s. They actually left, and once in a while it was used as extension of the underprivileged school. School for underprivileged, which is on a larger campus, which is around this. This was the kind of condition. And honestly, I have not studied or as to be a conservation architect, but I think I have just been driven by good sense and good friends who are experts in this area, who have been extremely helpful in sort of guiding me at times of when I did need that. So extensive documentation, because we had seen what documentation had been done, and to identify the real problems. So here one is trying to be again a surgeon, one is trying to diagnose the ailment, because a lot of waterproofing had been done twice over, thrice over. The roof was crumbling, trees were growing through it, and strangely, the water flow from the roof was all had all gone wrong. They were falling in the center of the arches, which was, I'm sure, never the earliest plan. So what you're seeing is about where the dampness was, where the roots were of trees which had entered into the slab, affected the beams. There was no wall plate. The walls were with mud mortar. So once the dampness came, the mud mortar became soggy and it would sink and the beam would come down, causing more cracks in the roof. So it was a kind of cyclic uh, process which was affecting the building. So we had to rework the waterproofing, remove excess load, and get back to a proper drainage pattern. Um, Also, to not just for budgetary reasons. Now, one thing one needs to understand very clearly: why would a person take a place like this for which is reasonably expensive to to bring it back to shape for a design store? So here, it becomes very we have to understand that from a business perspective of a design store, which is called Cinnamon, um, it it sort of bridges the world of modern design to traditional crafts, and a very diverse kind of merchandise. Sorry. So it became um, it would be a rather strong image and a container for for this idea of the products which actually bridge across time. Um, and if you see how we have sort of propped up certain structures with the red pillars, which are independent foundations, capped certain beams and replaced some of the beams, and some complex situations where it was a step profile. Um, and yeah, I think this project was largely done by myself with a lot of sketches and things, and um, about 140 sessions, 20 days a month, over 7 months. Um, because it was also old buildings do not reveal everything uh, easily. Sometimes there are surprises, and that has to be observed. So it was also about trying to reuse all the material and leave the evidence of the process of um, bringing the building back to its stable structural condition. So as I realized that this so I think here it is important to realize why certain buildings fail in a certain places. Or what we realized was that this was actually at the fringe of a lake, or more like it was on close to the wetlands. So perhaps it was given to the trust because nobody really wanted this land, and this is of course very close to the commercial street, which is the most a great shopping place in Bangalore. So the soil was difficult, and secondly, the rainwater, which was not being drained properly, was taking away the soil between the foundation stones. So all the corners of the building were falling apart, sort of were falling outwards, and that was also causing a problem. So it had to be stitched with stone and strengthened so that it could actually survive. And as I mentioned about the waterproofing and things like that, all that was redone. Even certain gates were added. And here my experience with the Freedom Park. And so we had this interesting gate with a little locking device which would you know which would be closed sometimes. So this is what it looks like now. So there's very little that I would have touched, but that's the most difficult part. The plinth has been extended, um, and only the patching of the plaster has been done. And that's the wonderful thing about lime plaster, that the joints do not separate, unlike cement, because of the time it takes to mature itself to its hardness and permanence, and the slowness of the process avoids any kind of crack. So as you see in the left as well as, but more prominently on the right, that's a steel beam which is supported on these four slim tubes, which are symmetrically placed. And those tubes, so if you compare so they're only connect at different places because they're at different levels. So this was a quite an interesting thing which I was able to achieve, that supporting one place by having non-aligned places of the supports, just making a simple bracket, the stitching, the transition of levels, because some of the floorings were modified and they were in bad shape. Even the stone flooring was in poor shape, but we could relay it properly. The columns were deteriorating at the bottom, so a very simple cement skirting, which was added to it. So you're back to a lovely, charming. So it's as a typology, and this is what if one looks at the Chettiar houses in Chettinad, you will find certain similarities. So perhaps there is a connection between people who were building in their hometown of the trust. Most of them were Chettiar, so they do have a home there, so that they would get somebody from there. And the pattern and the typology sort of continues of this tiny courtyard. I come to something which is about almost, which I would not strictly categorize, but I think this is a larger discussion. I wouldn't strictly categorize as something which is adaptive reuse, because this is a new building. But I'm seeing the flow of thought and um, almost trying to make a narrative which is about projection and perception. Um, and knowing that Bangalore is a skilled migrants city, a lot of them young, in who are very young, and the place is bustling, and so here this place is the largest brew pub in Asia, almost 65,000 square feet. Why I'm showing this here is actually it behaves like a set. It is designed as a set, and that set actually like a movie set, which is rather permanent. I mean, this is on a leased land for the next 15, 20 years. um, that it would become. Now there are a couple of things one has to think about. One is, when one goes here, one always imagines a couple of things. One is, was this a village square? Is this in which part of the world? Is it parts of Mysore? Is it parts of Italy? Is it parts of Rajasthan? Is it from colonial times? Is it from an earlier time? So I think this idea of creating a set which works on the kind of psychological impact and the ease that it creates, that this is a place which feels the day one it opens, it feels like it has always been, and it has just been appropriated. So it is in some ways giving the sense of adaptive reuse by its architecture. But all this has been done almost like an art director rather than, who's creating a set design for the story, which is created. A lot of course, a lot of from demolished buildings, we picked up a lot of material for at least some idea of aging, which would show up again. And of course, so now, as I said, is it a village square or is just an open space? And the idea was also about um, a place which will just get overgrown with its landscape, so that it's not about the building at all. And I think that's something which is a recurring theme in a lot of our work, where um, that life should play itself out, and architect and the moments that one remembers is all that matters, and buildings just have to play their part in enabling that. So that's like saying the iconic architect is generating a process which can be consumed, and it can obscure the architecture itself. So that is a different position of ego. And so I think it's an interesting space to, so that it will just dilute itself, and what matters is its growth with time and with the people. um, so yeah, I think from that perspective, that's why I put this here actually to and of course this is played out like the Game of Thrones. It is also played out as um, a Russian oil baron's place. So yeah, of course, it's huge. It during the FIFA World Cup final, it had 4,500 people inside, which meant that I had to check that none of the weld joints were failing, so that because it was really overcrowded and being tested. So I will end with a project which is actually in the same space, where I talk about adaptive reuse, which is, of course, the use is still from what was first a house, then it became a restaurant, which was um, a continental kind of place, and this would be above average cost kind of price point of the place in a prime area in Indiranagar, which is the most happening place for food. So this is what it has become now, which has just been opened last year. And this works on a very different um, concept of numbers. The pricing starts from a dish cost from 75 rupees to maybe 250 rupees. So it has now created a model of business which is really like old Bangalore, where one could come with a grandchild, with the grandparents, with friends, with lovers, with it's um, so it's a space where everything has been opened up, and enjoy the just enjoy the lovely weather which Bangalore is blessed with. Um, so these pictures have just been taken last week. Recreating again in some ways. So one is not looking at a language which is driven by an architect as a signature, but one is actually trying in such places. So I think one is because I have other work where the signature is rather strong, um, and is so each project is being looked at as a narrative which is creating a place. And so the prime focus is about its use and people and memory. So yeah, this is where I will stop. Um, and yeah, I would welcome a few questions. Thank you so much for being there and for the patience.